Well, here we are. It's a Friday morning, late Friday morning, approaching noon, in fact. And Pat McGart is waiting for us in Donegal. How are you this morning, Pat?
I'm grand, Jude. We had some technical difficulties there, but I think we've got them resolved now.
Ah, yes. Good always overcomes evil in the long run.
Absolutely.
You were telling me, Pat, incidentally, that you would tend to go out with your missus every so often, just to get out of the house, kind of thing.
Jude, when you retire, we have this sort of idea. We call them gallivanting days, and it's very simple. We just decide, someday we get up and say, right, we're away today. We can end up in the Spirins, we can end up in West Donegal, we could end up. In fact, we've ended up as far as Carrick-on-Shannon and Leitrim. And I absolutely adore the Glens of Antrim. They're my favourite place on earth, and I've got won the lotto. I'd buy a wee place in Carnlough.
That's why you like it.
I love it.
What did you win?
No, if I did, I said if I did.
You what?
If I won the lotto.
Oh, I see. If you won the lottery, sorry.
Jeepers, give us a break, Jude. Jesus, if I won the lotto.
Yeah, well, that's very sensible. We would do the same thing, but we wouldn't do it to the same extreme. You do feel the need to get out of the house for a while, and even when you don't feel particularly like stirring your behind, it's good for you. It gives you a change.
Even Jude, to get out and go along and stop off at somewhere in the middle of nowhere and have a cup of coffee again and get a wee cup of coffee and sit down. Sometimes you get into conversation with people. I ended up in a place in South Donegal. They're discussing the Ukraine with a lorry driver, the situation in Ukraine. And the man knew considerably more about it than I did.
Isn't it great? It's marvelous the way you can run into people. The only thing that I'm always worried when I speak to somebody is they're going to be as boring as hell. I mean, I'll probably be boring as hell too, but that doesn't.
And then how do you get rid of them?
Exactly. You think you want to adopt them and take them home? Anyway, let's address the affairs of the nation. And the woman in the limelight at the moment, or at least recently, was Michelle O'Neill, the leader of the Sinn Féin party in the north and First Minister in waiting. So the wait will depend on the DUP. But she talked about how when she became pregnant, actually the phrase now you're supposed to use it partly is fell pregnant. Did you know that, Pat?
No, I didn't know that, no.
Well, I keep reading this and I keep seeing it. When I fell pregnant, she became pregnant, and she was 16 at the time, and she had a baby, and she said she was prayed over by the nuns, I guess.
Excuse me, Dr. Colseen, you're the guy with the doctorate here. What's the difference?
Editor McGart.
Shut up a minute. Never mind all that. What's the difference between prayed over and prayed for?
Well, that's the thing, you see. It's a question of how you sort of picture that. I automatically, if you say somebody prayed for someone, I tend to think of that as something that's done at a distance. That a nun, when she went to bed, or even the nuns maybe had this special intention, like the rosary or something, and that they included Michelle in their prayers. If they say prayed over, it has implications for me of Michelle on her knees as a penitent, and the congregation of nuns, or several nuns, or maybe the whole school praying over her while she kneels there, an object of shame and sort of pity. I doubt very much if that's what happened, that she was prayed over in that way, that the whole school was brought in, or even that all the nuns were brought in. But there might have been an element of, she's clearly implying there was an element of shaming her to some extent in the way that they prayed.
I think it one's sort of benign, the other is not.
Yes, well put, very well put. But I spent a long time getting to
but the point I'm getting at, why did she choose to say she was prayed over rather than prayed for? Yeah,
it does sound as if she didn't get a very warm reception. That they were very cool and disapproving of her having got pregnant. But now, I can well believe that, and I do think it's a bad thing because people, they've got pregnant, and you've got to support them. I have some sympathy in that. I think we've lurched the opposite direction. There was a time when, for a girl to become pregnant, was seen as the worst sin slash crime in the world.
Didn't you have 5 sisters?
I did, yeah, that's right. And I'd happily say my mother, she also, I know she worried a lot. I remember her talking and saying, you wouldn't worry about people that would actually kill you. What would be that anybody who would try to kill your soul? Yeah. What she meant was that they'd be led into mortal sin and, then suffer for all eternity.
Yeah, so, I had 2 sisters, Jude, and my mother, if one of them had got pregnant, now they're in their 70s now. But my back in the day, if they had got pregnant, my mother couldn't have dealt with it. It would have been the ultimate shame.
Well, it was a funny mix, wasn't it? It was a funny mix of, well, certainly in our house, and I think most people then, a mix of, clearly sexual sin had been committed. So therefore, in terms of your relationship with your God, that had been distorted. But also it was a mixture of, in with that was this, how you were seen in society, the social shame of it. So the two things went together, and therefore it was very much avoided, and it was seen as a calamity. Now,
absolutely.
Now, that was bad. That means no doubt, obviously it was bad. Today, we think very differently about it. I sometimes think that we perhaps have lurched the other direction, because if I was a head teacher, I can't imagine myself as a nun, but if I was a teacher in a school and working with kids, and a girl who was one of my pupils had become pregnant, I would worry for her, because I know how hard it is to get through your teen years normally. I know how hard it is to get through your work and study and all the rest, the pressures there. And if you add to that, having a child and having to take time off and the whole way that changes your life completely, you'd worry about that, and you certainly wouldn't want to encourage it. Yeah. Am I being particularly...
No, I agree with you. Now, Michelle must have been a tough wee girl in the sense that she said that within some very, very short time after having a child, she went back to start studying for her A-levels. And she said the school was not particularly welcoming, that in fact they made quite a fuss. And it was suggested to her, how dare she come back, that she had no permission to come back. But she said that she had made up her mind that she was going ahead with her education, and it was her right for her to do that thing. So she's obviously a tough-minded wee girl. And look at her now. She's deputy, or she's first minister in waiting. She's the head of Sinn Féin in Earth, and she's been a very able girl.
That's right. Well, good for her. Good for her. I suppose the only thing I'd leave with that notion of being prayed over is that kind of thinking, as you've indicated in your own family, I have indicated in my family when I was young, it was something that ran right through society, this disapproval of a girl who had become pregnant. And it all tied into the notion, of course, of virginity. Like if a girl lost, as we said, her virginity, then that was a terrible thing. But you rarely heard anything about a boy losing his virginity.
I'll put it against you. I bet you the young fellow who got Michelle O'Neill pregnant or fell pregnant, I'm sure he wasn't prayed over.
No,
in fact, he was probably cheered by the other guys.
Exactly. Jack's a lad.
He's a bit of a lad type thing.
Yeah. Yes, it was a bad situation. The other thing, of course, that came into that, that I think I have a notion that Crawley dealt with that in Talkback.
But it came out of an original interview with Mark Carruthers.
We haven't seen it, so
I haven't seen it. No,
we're depending on sort of little bits.
I'm depending on reports that I read.
Well, the other thing that they said was that she had said that there was no alternative to but political violence at the time. And she's coming for a lot of flack about that. They didn't go after her, the DUP didn't go after her about her producing a child, but they went after her for this and said of course there was an alternative. What do you think,
Dr. Combs, hold on. You were the guy, you lived through the 40s and the 50s and 60s.
You trying to make me sound old, are you?
But I didn't grow up in the North in those times. You did. What's your view?
Well, I'll tell you something. Before the outbreak of violence, right? There was a whole period where everybody knew that gerrymandering went on. Everybody knew that discrimination existed. But somehow or another, we treated it partly as a joke. I remember being in St. Columns, and I remember guys, day boys particularly, would talk about Dairy Corporation and how, 1/3 population of Protestant managed to elect 2/3 of the corporation. So there was a shrug of the shoulders, and sort of made a laugh of, certainly in my experience, more than anything else. But of course, maybe out in the working class, well, that was sort of vaguely middle class, I suppose we were, borders, but certainly out in the working class world, immigration was an awful bloody curse. People had to go, it simply had to go to England to get a job because they weren't going to get any job here. And we were looked down as second-class citizens. And the Orange Order, I remember well, the Orange Order marching up the road towards Omagh. I remember the way it poisoned relationships between us and the children on the other side of the fence, which was a Protestant estate. So it was a bad state, but we sort of accepted it and with a shrug, and most of the time had a laugh at it. But then John Hume and the Civil Rights Movement said, this is ridiculous. We're not going to put up with this. We're going to say, we want no more gerrymandering. We want no more discrimination. These are our rights as British citizens. And they pushed for that. And the immediate reaction of the state was to attack them, literally attack them. The RUC attacked them. Loyalists, what were known as Paisleyites then, attacked them. And they were beaten off the streets. And of course, the next stage was obvious. People were getting thumped around. People were even killed. And nationalist population, or a section of the nationalist population, said, there's no way we're going to sit here getting our faces punched in. We're going to do a bit of punching back. And the troubles followed. That was how I saw it, Pat. I don't know.
Someone, Michelle O'Neill gave a wee simple example herself. She said when she was learning to drive, she says it was a small thing. She went out and she was wearing a seatbelt. But because her father was a former prisoner and a Sinn Féin representative and was known Republican, she was stopped. And she got done for not wearing a seatbelt, even though she was. And she said, look, I'm wearing a seatbelt. And the cop says there, look, when it goes to court, we know who will be believed. They have small scale, harassment and vindictiveness and sort of whatever, but so on. But Jude, like I've listened to some people the last day. I've never agreed with the IRA campaign, but I totally, and I mean totally understand where it came from. Jude, and we keep repeating this, anywhere there's subjugation and oppression, people are going to oppose it. It's as simple as that. When you have a society that was artificially created to create a hegemonic unionist control, created artificially, where you have discrimination, sectarianism, where you have one party rule for 50 years, where you have a police force that's 93% Protestant and Unionist, when you have the B specials, which was 100%, when you have all that sort of, and you said it the other day, a lot of families were devastated by both unemployment, discrimination, immigration, all that. Dude, and when I listen to some of the people, and I'm surprised at someone too, that that the IRA came out of nowhere. I don't agree with the violence, but I totally understand where they come out of.
Well, you see, if you follow this line of them being criminals, I always thought that was the most laughable thing, that you would have this section of the population, thousands of young guys, who up to then were peaceful, more or less peaceful, law-abiding citizens. And then suddenly they took it into their head they were going to start killing people. And they killed them for about 30 years, then they stopped killing them. Where did all that come out of? Is it, I think it's sort of ridiculous. One other point on this, Pat, and I think this is a very important point to make. Part of the population the nationalist population resorted to arms in response. A majority probably of the nationalist population didn't. And these are the people that are hailed by Jeffrey Donaldson and so on. And these are people who would themselves say, well, my father didn't. My father went on working. My father didn't join the IRA. But there are different reasons why people don't engage in violent political violence. One of the reasons is that they believe it is essentially wrong. They don't believe it's right to go around trying to kill people. But there are, I would say, dare I say, a majority even of those people who didn't, in the national side, who didn't resort to violence, who did it for reasons rather of self-preservation than high-mindedness. because they knew if they resorted to violence, the IRA, as you've said on another program here, if you joined the IRA, you were told inside the next 6 months, year, there's a high chance you could either be killed or be spending a long term in prison. Do you still want to join the IRA? Now, a lot of people wouldn't have even gone to that far because personally, they just wanted to go on living. They were fearful. So I really get irritated when people say, well, I chose the peaceful path. Brackets, I'm a good guy. When very often the fact is I chose the peaceful path because I was scared I might get killed if I didn't.
Yeah. Jude, I met quite a few people, along the path who said, who said basically that they would have joined the IRA, but they just didn't the balls for it, if you'll pardon that expression. And Jude, I remember reading somewhere, I think it was some sort of academic study, that the most you could expect to, if you joined the IRA, from the day you joined was 7 years. Within 7 years, you're either A, dead, or B, in jail. Nobody got past 7 years apparently if you're an active guy. So Jude, that's reality. No, Jude, I was listening to some of the people and so on. Jeffrey Donaldson said there was there was never justification for violence. And Kenny Donaldson, a friend of yours back in the day?
Stop. No,
he said perceived or real grievances never legitimized murder.
Would you say the same thing about Ukraine?
You see, that's the point. No, Jude. I'm at pains to point out that I am not a supporter of violence, but I think.
Well, actually, you are.
I think it's a.
Sorry, I'm going to have to correct you there. You are a supporter of violence. So am I, because we pay our taxes. We pay taxes.
Yes. But the point I'm making is the hypocrisy. The hypocrisy gets on me nerves when Jude. I have a thing. I don't even like killing anything. I feel really bad if we run over a cat or anything like that, and so on. And I've got a real thing about that. But I understand where people were coming from. And Jude, when you sit back and you look at any society throughout history, when there's people are badly treated, for every action there is a reaction.
But you see, I think the part of the problem was several problems at work here. But one of the big problems is that the unionist politicians will not accept the fact that there really was 50 years of discrimination and gerrymander, and that many people's lives were sort of ruined by that because the families had to split up. Father had to go to England, had to work there, maybe come home a couple of times a year if he's lucky. And otherwise, and people lived in poverty as a result. So they will not admit that that was the case. If they were to admit that was the case, I think there'd be a much better chance we would come together. There is a solid refusal. The best they could say was Trimble saying, "Oh, it was a cold house for Catholics." Cold house.
But can you imagine what it was like? What it was like to be a Catholic in places like Portadown or Larne or on the fringes of the Shankill Road, where you're, where there was this sort of intimidation and oppression all the time, where there was active discrimination. It's all very well for some of the nice Catholics who are living in their houses in the Colmore Road in Derry. Derry was not as bad. There wasn't that same hardline sectarianism in Derry as there was in Belfast. Derry was a mainly nationalist Catholic city, even though it was discriminated against. And look at the reaction. I remember Martin McGuinness. I had a discussion one day with Martin. I said, "Well, hey, Martin, you joined the IRA. John Hume didn't." He says, "Yeah, but," he says, "No, big deal." He says, "Everybody's got a choice in life." He says, when I was young, he said, I had no intention of joining the IRA, but he says, circumstances. He says, the war came to me. I didn't go looking for the war. There was raids in the Bogside and the Craigan in the middle of the night. He says, "Pat, have you ever seen your father dragged down the stairs with the head of his hair?" And I said, "No, I live in Letterkenny." And he says, "Well, I saw mine that happening." And he says, "I had two friends shot dead or killed by the British Army." He says, "No, circumstances make people."
Well, I don't think we'll ever succeed in convincing unionist politicians like Jeffrey or Ian Paisley Jr. that there was no alternative in that sense. In a way, she's wrong to say there was no alternative. There was an alternative, but that alternative was taken for all sorts of motives, and they weren't always the most high-minded motives.
By the way, just one point I must ask you. The one thing that annoys me too, unionists never ever take any responsibility for creating the situation that brought about that violence.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That is absolutely true. And it is such a pity because they're the ones that go on and say, that, we're the nationalists or the IRA or Republicans are unrepentant of what they did.
Yeah.
Well, if they could start by repenting for the foundations they laid, which made that possible. Anyway, it's a long and nasty little story, and there's hypocrisy, there's lies, and there's a refusal to accept what happened. However, let's go on to something even worse, and that is radio presenters. Regina Doherty and Eoin O'Brien, for a short while, I gather, forsook their jobs as politicians, as TDs in the Dáil. Regina Doherty isn't a TD anymore.
No, she's not. No, she's a senator.
She's a senator, of course, which means that they want to get her back in again, and they hope they can do that in the next election. What's your thoughts on this? This kind of thing happens every so often, where
it usually happens on a bank holiday, Jude, when they get in somebody just different for a bank holiday weekend. During the July, August, a lot of RT and news talk presenters disappear, and they bring in guest presenters. There's I can't remember the guy's. He's one of the, it doesn't matter. He's on RT every morning now, and so on. And no, all the regulars go out. But O'Brien, you see, would be considered hard left, and Regina would be considered hard right. And apparently, I just only bits I read now, I didn't hear them, but apparently they were actually very good. And O'Brien, who's normally very sort of intense, apparently very relaxed, and him and Regina apparently got on reasonably well. Mm-hmm. Now Regina is detested by the sort of the working class thing, and then the other side of stuff, O'Brien is regarded, as Che Guevara by the establishment. So it's an unusual combination.
Well, actually, there's a link to this story with our last one, and that is Regina Doherty once was on air, I'm sure discussing with Jerry Adams, and Jerry Adams said something about his brother having been shot, or his family having been shot, he himself having been shot, all the bad things that happened by state forces during the Troubles. And Regina Doherty's response to him was, actually, you brought it on yourself, Jerry.
Yeah, I remember that. I actually remember that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just incidental. I actually think it's a very good idea. It's a good idea for the radio station, because most of us I always have found it fascinating to see people who are known for public figures who are known for doing one thing, being in this case politicians or TDs or senators, and put in a totally different context and doing something different. Yeah. Because you learn a lot about the person somehow. You get to know the person rather than the politician in this case. Yeah. And I think that's very important, because I remember saying to, I think it was Jerry Kelly, I was saying, there's all sorts of ways now, online and social messaging and so on, huge electoral weapon. And he says, it is very good. And I remember doing interviews with, and put them online, of videos of, I think, Jerry Kelly, and I did one of John Finucane, and I did one of a couple of other Sinn Féin people, and one of them pointed out that anytime I did an interview with them and put it up online, that they didn't get elected. But it is important, because people get to be known and are known as a person. But if you talk to people like Jerry Kelly and these, they'll say, okay, social media and all that, terrific, but there's nothing beats personal contact.
Absolutely.
Person sees you and gets to know you, even over a 2-minute period. They don't forget that. They don't forget that.
Yeah. I was involved in a campaign years ago in Donegal with a certain politician. And I sort of said to him, look, you need to get into the media and all the rest and so on. Yeah, he says, yeah, that's true. But he says, hey, no, you need to knock on doors and go in. And he went in and had numerous cups of teas. And see, when he left, you hear people, geez, that's a lovely fella. Jude, the old personal touch is still very important. What is it? Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local.
Aye. I'm surprised people haven't found a way, though, politicians haven't found a way to get a kind of a middle ground there. I mean, if you think about it, here we are discussing this event, and we're doing it at a distance. We're doing it online. I would say the last 2 or 3 years, you must have got to know me, something about me as a person because of the things I said or the way I looked or whatever. And likewise, I've grown to know you. So it's not the same as face to face, but it is considerable, you know.
But Jude, right here, right, I'll give you Jeremy Corbyn, use him as an example, came to this house and I was sitting like me and you're chatting now. The Jeremy Corbyn I had seen on TV was not the same Jeremy Corbyn I met at all. Martin McGuinness has this reputation as being cold and sort of, the boy general, the IRA. Martin McGuinness that I knew, and me and you have discussed this before, was actually a very open, friendly, nice guy. In fact, many of the people in the opposite political divide who met him couldn't believe that this was the same person, he didn't have two heads, and the media can make somebody seem very, very different to what they actually are, So I'm just using that. John Hume, it was regarded as St. John by a minute. John could be very narky, prickly.
Yeah, like us all. No,
I'm not having a go at him. I'm just saying, not everybody is what they seem.
Aye, that's right. Well, just finally, before we leave this one, would you agree with me that notion of maybe politicians could find kind of a middle ground and use the internet, Zoom, say, in more creative ways than they are? So you have the door-to-door stuff, plus you have an enhanced version of, or a more successful version of online.
Right. Say I am Pat McGart, TD for Northwest Donegal, and I put out a podcast every. Who the hell's going to listen? It's going to me.
I don't. I'm telling you now, Pat. If you were TD for North Donegal, and you had a regular podcast, people would flock to that. I mean, Barry McElduff, as far as he certainly was doing it at one stage. He's a town councillor in Oma now, and he did a little weekly sort of podcast. He spoke about what things were coming up and what problems were there. And I find it, I don't live in Oma, I haven't for the last 60 years or so, but I find it fascinating. I find it really interesting. It wasn't the same thing as having them come into my house and talk, but it was really worth doing.
Yeah, maybe you're right, Jude. I don't know, but you see, if every politician's doing, but having said that, you're probably right in a sense that if my local TD says, right, here's a 5-minute podcast, here's what's happening, here's what I'm involved in, and you might sit down and say, okay, that's fair enough, fair enough.
Yeah, it's not the same as him coming to your house, but at the same time, I think
it's a halfway house, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, you can feel like if he was on a Zoom thing as we are, and if say there was 10 people on this, and say I was the politician, and I said, George, what do you think? My saying that and asking him the question and using his name.
Interaction.
Yeah, people like that. And it's not the same as face to face, but it still works to a degree. Yeah. And I think we've only begun to explore that. I predict, Pat, when you're dead and gone, that online stuff will be really good.
I presume so.
That's distinct from this garbage.
Yeah.
Okay. Will we talk about Truss and Sunak? If we compare to? I watched it last night. Did you watch it last night?
No, Jude, I have stopped watching it. They're the most poor. I swear to God, don't do it. But the other alternative would be more enjoyable. Would be slitting your wrists and watching that. And Jude,
you need an exciting life. I watched the whole thing last night. An hour and a half.
I watched some of them. No, I couldn't. I'm watching the Commonwealth Games, and I don't even like diving, but I sat and watched diving last night. The platform diving.
Well, I see we have 10 minutes to go, so let's
crack
on. I watched it. I'll give you a quick rundown in this. Yeah. One of the questions that were asked was, is there anything you have in your closet that we don't know about? And the presenter asked both of them separately. They appeared separately. Truss first for the first 3/4 of an hour, and then Sunak the second 3/4 of an hour. And she asked them separately, do you have anything in your closet that would be damaging to you? And they both said no. So I thought that was a clever thing to do, because the fact of the matter is everybody has got something in their past they'd rather wasn't made public. So that I was a hostage to fortune in a way. However, I thought that their policies, as they announced them, were less important, not unimportant, but less important than their personalities, how they came across. I found Sunak to be absolutely bristling with facts. He always had the facts in anything he talked about. He spoke in a clear and a fluent way. And it's not that he said anything in particular that impressed me, but in generally struck me as a guy across his brief and energetic and forceful. And I suppose essentially had the qualities of a leader. I found Liz-Truss painful. The presenter again and again caught her out on having said something in the past and then saying something different now. And she tried to wriggle out of that. And when she asked the audience at the end, after the politicians had gone, she asked the audience, hands up how many people felt the more successful person there was Rishi Sunak. Practically the whole room, the whole studio put their hand up to say they thought Rishi Sunak, despite the fact that Liz-Truss is, 30% or something ahead?
Yeah, ahead.
So, I dislike both their policies. Sunak wants to cut taxes too, but not just yet. He wants to send people to Rwanda. He wants to have a £10 fine if you don't turn up for a doctor's appointment. So there's a lot of things. He's a Tory. He's a hardline Tory. But in terms of personality, I find him far, far more attractive than Liz-Truss. I find her really off-putting. Do you find that from what you see in these two people?
I watched some of it, not last night now. Truss has had a very successful charisma bypass.
How is that?
Oh, she's unbelievable. Jude, she is an extremely boring person. And Jude, I think she's nakedly ambitious. Jude, she will become whatever you want her to become if she could get your vote. She was a Remainer who's now totally totally pro-Brexit. She didn't like breaking the law, but when she saw that the protocol would be a winner for her, she sort of embraced it, and in fact became more hardline than Lord Frost. She has now become. I think she sees herself. She's gone for the ground that Boris Johnson was on. She's, Sunak said, look, Sunak represents sort of old Tory values. Ken Clarke, John Major, and that sort of stuff. Competent ability. I think what Truss is basically just saying, I'll wing it. I'll just be the new Boris Johnson. But it's very popular, Jude, because I'm using this. It's for the morons. The easily fooled out there, and there are so many of them, Jude. The day of believing that the electorate is smart is long gone in my head.
Yeah, you heard what she said about Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, the insulting and the contempt with which she just dismissed Nicola Sturgeon.
So, given that, which of the two would you like to see become the new leader of the Tories and therefore Prime Minister?
Well, I think Sunak might actually be the better one, and because he seems to have, at the very least, respect for the old conventions. I don't think Liz-Truss has any real principles at all. But I think she will go to the right if that's where she thinks it's going to. Sunak refused to play ball with Boris Johnson and in regard to taxation.
Do you want to ask me which I want to win?
Which one do you want to win?
I want Truss to win.
Yeah,
because she's nastier. She's nastier. Because when she said that Nicola Sturgeon, the best thing to do was ignore her. She's a detention seeker. That would have gone down really well in Scotland. That would add, I'd say, maybe 2,000.
Add Jacob Rees-Mogg to that as well. He said something similar, and he's the gift that keeps on giving to Scottish independence.
That's it, you see, that's the decision you have to make. The truth of the matter is, if I was a Tory, I think it'd be very important for me to elect Rishi Sunak, but I'm not a Tory. And therefore, I'm very happy, just in a way that I'm happy that Brexit happened, although in some ways I'm not. But overall, Brexit was a boon for the Irish people, and I think it's going to be a boon for the Scottish people. Liz-Truss will be, as you say, the gift that keeps on giving, and it'll be good news for Scotland, really good news. And I think it'll be good news for here, because she's going to screw up the economy so badly. It's in bad shape already. She's going to make it with twice
Did
as
you hear?
bad.
Oh, stop you there, Dr. Collins, a minute. I have heard now numerous Tories getting up and saying we have the fastest growing economy, and the figures don't back. Yet I don't hear any Labour guy getting up and saying this is bullshit.
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, I think
are they scared to be accused of talking down the economy or something?
Well, this is it. That you see this thing of talking down Britain. That's the line that Boris would have taken. No, I see. Well, it's from all the experts. The next year and a half is going to be bloody rough.
Yeah.
And if you throw in the added ingredient of Liz Truss, I would say catastrophic. And if that's the case, I would say there would be certainly a majority of Scots couldn't wait to get out of that and into the EU. And I would say there'd be a majority of people in the north and the south who would want to get into the EU.
But do you hear the arrogance of Truss? He's saying, just ignore her. She's an attention seeker. This is a woman who heads the biggest party by far. And it shows to the Scots that they have absolutely zero rights when it comes to their self-determination, that the English nationalists decide. Have the Scots no pride? Like, where are all those people who think the Tory party is the greatest? No, in other words, you're not allowed to be a Scots person. You're not allowed to have independence. The English will decide that for you.
I think they're saying they allow them to be exist as Scots, but actually they're just children.
Yeah,
they're led by this child wants to get attention. So let's ignore that child, and maybe she'll grow up.
Attention seeker. Yeah. This is a woman who is one of the most able politicians in Europe.
Well, you see, that's the choice that the choice we don't have to make, but that's the choice that the Tories will have to make. And if my natural instincts are that I'd like to see Sunak win, but I'll not really die in a ditch over Truss getting it, because there's an awful lot of upsides to that. That's really us, except for we have 2 minutes, but very quickly we could talk. We could natter on about something else. We could talk about what Micheál Martin has said about Sinn Féin and taxation.
I read that one the other day.
You can find now to 1 minute.
Yeah, but Letitia said that Sinn Féin would tax all the local small businesses, and they would tax anybody earning over 100,000 and all the rest of it. And he basically said this was in the wake, of course, Jude. Our exchequer returns, I think, are set up until the end of July, are 7 billion ahead of projections, and he's taking great credit for that. Now, Piers Doherty of Sinn Féin, this is the potted version of what he said. Piers Doherty said basically that's total distraction that Letitia is at, that that he wants to ignore the fact that the middle class are and deep doo-doo financially. Everything's going up, the cost of living's going up, taxes are high. You try getting a tradesman, go see a doctor, it's really bad. So he says he's attacking Sinn Féin to cover up his own. Right, Jude, your turn.
Yeah, well, the thing that I noticed in that article was that he was saying that Sinn Féin the reflex action is attack, and tax. And they were a threat to small and medium enterprises. Now, that Piers already says that's not true. That's not true. He says if you had a small and medium enterprise that ran for 10 or 15 years, they then started making money, that Sinn Féin would come in and tax them. And Doherty says nothing of the sort. Anyway, there you go. That's it. Now, Pat, have you a joke, a riddle, or is there anything in your closet you would like to tell us?
Yeah, there's a wee Scottish girl staying with us at the minute. She's 11, and she says, "Pat, what age do you think you will be when you die?" Hey,
she didn't give you any alternatives, did she?
Maybe grandfather